This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations.
We want families to come here and gain insightful strategies that empower them to successfully teach diverse learners at home.
Hosted by founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool, Peggy Ployer.
Our goal is that these powerful weekly conversations will boost your confidence to cultivate the best at-home learning environment for your student.
For more homeschool resources, go to spedhomeschool.com. You're listening to Empowering Homeschool Conversations with Peggy Ployer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Today, we are going to talk about purpose-driven homeschooling instruction. And today, my guest is Lindsay Leiviska, and she's a homeschool mom of 3, 2 biological and 1 adopted with special needs. And she's a homeschool parent and parenting coach as well. And she confesses she's a proud ADHD woman. I am excited to have you on the show today, Lindsay, and to talk about this topic, especially as a lot of people are getting started with their homeschooling. And it's so good to know why we're doing what we're doing. You know, that big know your why. That's kind of what we're going to focus on today, especially around the topic of having a struggling learner. So welcome, Lindsay, and thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Well, Peggy, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Yes, absolutely. This knowing your why, I think, you know, a lot of people, and I've seen it over the years. I've been in the homeschooling community for over 20 years, and you know, write your homeschool purpose and, you know, and put it up on a wall. And I think sometimes we don't have large enough purposes, or our purposes are a little skewed when we especially have a struggling student. Sure. Because we want to fix and we want to correct, and not always do we look at the larger picture. And so I'm excited that you wanted to approach this topic, especially with the background that you have and some of the experiences you have in homeschooling yourself. So why don't we kick off by just having our audience get to know you a little bit better, and tell us a little bit about your homeschooling journey and a little bit about your family and yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, I love that we're talking about this, by the way. I love it because it really anchors you. It really anchors you as a homeschool mom, especially when things get really, really hard. So yes. As far as my background, again, my name is Lindsay Leiviska, and I knew I was going to homeschool when I was in graduate school to become a teacher. I saw all I was learning. I realized I was doing my student teaching in a low-income area where we had I was back in California, where we had lots of kids that just had a very diverse group of needs, lots of kids that didn't have the language, that needed just completely different strategies to reach them. And I just remember thinking, that was like my first moment where I realized this one size fits all approach is so unhealthy. It's so inappropriate, and it can hurt children in the long term for what we want for them in the long term. And so that's when 20 something years ago, that's when I decided to homeschool, and praise the Lord, my husband agreed to that. My future husband agreed to that. So we started homeschooling. Let's see, I have a 17-year-old now. She's a senior. It's our senior year.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. Let's not even talk about that. And I don't want her going anywhere. And I homeschooled my 2 biological girls very traditionally and with a lot of expectations about the way things were to look. So even though I knew there was a nugget in my mind that knew that things needed to be attuned to the child in front of me, the learner in front of me, I was very, very traditional when I look back on it, as to I had a one-track mind of, this is how you do it. You follow the lesson, you obey, and you do it. And God had other plans for us when 9 years ago we adopted a baby boy, and he was a little angel baby for the first 18 months. But when he hit 18 months, our lives completely shattered. I mean, really, our life imploded. He hit, kicked, scratched, bit, couldn't sleep. I mean, did not sleep for maybe more than 2 hours for years at a time. We were sleep deprived. It was the hardest experience of my life. There's no doubt about it. My girls watched me kind of crumble into a ball and Like I was a shell of a person
Wow.
because of the sleep deprivation, the
Absolutely.
constant walking on eggshells. He screamed all the time when he was awake, which was always because he didn't
Hmm.
have language. He didn't have language. And I was trying to
Right.
use traditional Christian parenting approaches that were check the box. If you just do this, then this will be how your child turns out. And that was no. And
Right.
that didn't work. But by God's grace, I have learned so much. I had to learn, basically, I had to let go of everything I thought was right as a
Yeah.
parent and as an educator. And I had to really meet the child in front of me.
Hmm.
What you said earlier about changing, you said something about when we start to homeschool, we think we need to fix.
Right.
We think we need to fix and we need to change. And I think I went into parenting thinking that, had this idea that it's our job to mold the child into what what our ideal is, what we've been told within the world
Right.
and church is supposed to be the perfect child. And that's just not how it is. In fact, God had just taught me that,
Absolutely.
he gave me this beautiful baby boy and these two girls, which I believe he saved them through this little boy. Because I had to meet the child in front of me and really embrace this child as who he is. And so all that to say, I started helping moms better understand their child's brain, their child's wiring, what could be going on behind behavior, why language is so important.
Right.
So I started a Heart for All Students in order to reach the mom who was a few years behind me and better equip them so that they could equip their children to thrive into adulthood as themselves and not this ideal person that we've created in our world, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think the more we fight against that change that is just so required, the harder it becomes. I just answered a question on Facebook, like right before I came on to the broadcast with you, and one's mom's like, but I put all this stuff in front of him and he still says it's schoolwork. And I said, you haven't changed enough. So, it's like, we'll take these little baby steps to change, but we have to let go of those ideals totally. Is like losing our lives. And it's so very, very difficult. I have 10 adopted special needs siblings. So, and I didn't share that with you ahead of, so my parents have been through this 10 times and I've watched my parents change, and that allowed me to change much quicker when I saw things happening with my own children and going, oh, this is not going to work. And I'm going to need to learn from others that, just the way I was raised. Even my parents, they raised us 4 biological kids very differently than they had to raise my adopted siblings. And it is with any need, whether the child's adopted or not, although that usually comes with a whole boatload more of stuff.
Absolutely.
than the typical child with maybe a reading or math struggle. But still, there are some things that that change our purpose. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, as far as what should we consider our purpose is, if it isn't that we have to mold and change the child, like you said?
Oh, wow. That's huge. It's ironic because years ago, I was at Rick Warren's church when he wrote that book, Purpose Driven Life. We were there. That's where we started. That's where I was baptized, like 25 years ago. And it's just sweet to hear this purpose driven from a totally different lens. I truly believe, and I tell moms all the time when they're getting frustrated and upset about things not working out. I did all the things. I changed all my approach. I got the different curriculum. I'm happy. I'm doing shorter lessons, whatever it is. And I'm like, none of that matters. For me, what I truly believe is for me, and I encourage moms to really think about, is what do we want our children to believe about themselves into adulthood? Because our kids are going to spend 75 to 80%, God willing, of their lives as adults. And what they hear now, the messages that they receive consistently as a habit, as a pattern, are the thoughts and beliefs that they will take with them into adulthood. And
Right.
we know now, not just with neurodivergent kids with ADHD, autistic kids, children with dyslexia, anxiety, trauma backgrounds, through whether it's through adoption or foster care or complex, difficult childhood experiences. But we know that what we have been doing historically as a culture and as even a church with people that don't fit in the box is not serving them well. We just have to look at our mental health statistics. We have to look at just ADHD alone, the increased likelihood of drug abuse, or early pregnancies, risky behaviors, untreated, unaddressed, is unacceptable. And so to me, what I realized, and we as adults, even if we don't consider ourselves neurodivergent, or we didn't consider ourselves with special needs or struggling learners, we know what we're struggling with based on, right? We know it's our stuff that we brought, that came up in childhood, that we're holding on to, and that really are rooted deeply in us.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So
yes.
All that to say, for me, it's been, what do I want my kids to take with them up here in their heart, in their spirit? What do they want? I want them to believe about themselves, because it's that person that feels confident, that feels loved, that feels valued, that feels like I can make a difference. Like for my boy, it was something as simple as, I used to get so angry because he would climb up a shelf that I told him not to, because he wanted the one M&M that was on the top shelf behind the boxes that he knew were there, and at 2 years old, he would climb up and the house would be a mess and the kitchen would be a mess after I turned my back for 2 minutes. And what does traditional approaches tell us to do? No, sir, absolutely not. You need to nip it in the bud. If I continued that way, because he was always having those situations, what's he going to think about himself? So it had to change. It had to change to, wow, buddy, you are so perseverant. God has a plan for you. He gave you all this perseverance. I wonder what he's going to do for you. Now let's back up. Let's try that again. That's just a tiny tidbit, but it's reframing the lens on behavior, learning, everything, to God gave us this kid who he has mighty plans for, right? We say these things, and yet, I mean, I'm going to have to speak, a lot to this church piece, but like, we have got to, he says, let the little children come to me. Oh, he doesn't say once your mom fixes you.
Right.
Once your mom gets you to fall in line and your mom nips it in the bud. He doesn't say that.
Right.
He says the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Have a childlike faith. Right. So really to value that child with the vision of where and who you want them to believe they are about themselves. That helps a lot.
That is so powerful, because the last thing that we want to do is take away exactly what God has given them to be unique, because we say that over and over again, but our actions say something totally different, because we're stuck in those ruts of, well, this is what good parenting, this is what good homeschooling is supposed to look like. And then we just start appeasing, that perfect picture, or what we think the boxes we have to check to get to the other side. And yet I love that. It's your child's shaped box that needs to do that.
Yes.
Wow. That is just something to ponder and really rest on. I know I look back and think of how much I messed up my kids, because I didn't know any different.
Yes.
And, now that God has been just so kind to take me to a place where he's like, you know what? All I want is you.
Yes.
I don't want the stuff that you want to do for me. I don't want the publicity. I can do it myself. What I want is just you to sit here and to learn from me. And if we took more time in our homeschool planning to do that, and to look at our child and place our child before God and say, I'm offering this child up now to you. How do I teach them? How do I see them? How do I see them beyond all of the other stuff?
Yes.
that is what's so important. You know, in our community, we spend a lot of time talking about difficulties, struggles, all these things. And and I know in part of our homeschooling purpose, there's going to be some sort of equipping,
Yes.
because we're going to see those struggles, and we're
Yes.
going to, we can't just say, well, that's just something that comes with you, and dismiss it
Sure.
either.
Sure.
Um, but how do we intentionally help build that child up, yet see these struggles, these learning deficits, or just things that are going to require them probably for their lifetime,
Mhm.
some intentional training,
Mhm.
and kind of encapsulate all of that into, well, that it is still good,
Mm.
that it is still, something that God is working in and through, and that it's not a mistake to homeschool, even if we're going to have to spend, a lot of time around these things.
Mhm.
What is that bigger picture gonna look like, um, as far as this
The
child?
practical.
Yeah, the practical kind of,
Mhm.
but more so like an overall practical approach, and then
Okay.
we'll
Yeah.
kinda go into more of the details
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
So this is how I see it. And I have this like 4-step framework that I just in those years of absolute torture. I mean, it was so hard, and
Mm,
with my boy, but then it all spilled over into my girls were very much affected. So I've changed everything with them as well, even my
mm.
approach to homeschooling. So much um, is the first thing that lens. The first thing is relationship first. And what I
Yes.
mean by that is, okay, so that's another lens with which when things are really hard and I am stressed at the table or something like that because I
Mhm.
want something to go a certain way, or I really have my child's having a hard time, or they're dysregulated and getting very emotional or whatever,
Right.
is my job is to pursue my child's heart and through safe relationship, because
Yes.
with a safe relationship, okay, just like God doesn't come to us and say, you better fix this and you better do this and you better change that. No, nothing happens. If you want to get
Mm.
like theological sanctification, that process of growing doesn't happen until that safe relationship is established by God. So he
Right.
loves us first.
So good.
He
Yes.
loves us first in the mess, in our imperfections. He loves us first. That growth comes because we are influenced through safe relationship. So
Yes.
we need to, as mothers, change our perspective from you better get control of your child. That is
Mhm.
a lie. That is a
Yes.
lie.
Oh, so
To
yeah.
focus in on that relationship with your child, because when your child feels seen, valued, and loved by you, they believe you are in their corner,
Yes.
and they are going to be much more likely to be influenced by you to do the hard things,
Yeah.
because you are so safe to them. You are the person that they know they can trust with their
Mhm.
best interests. So it doesn't mean casting that vision. And I talk a lot about casting a vision for your child as to how God's going to use their unique way of seeing things. So if you have a child with dyslexia who has language processing issues, challenges with language processing, but maybe, or ADHD or any neurodivergency, because they all
Mhm.
kind of, there are a lot
Yeah,
of similarities. They all go
exactly.
together. Um, is wow, you are extremely creative and your lens is extremely creative. It's different than what the book is asking for. But
Mhm.
I like how you're seeing that. I wonder what God's going to do with that. He's got a purpose for that part of you. There's nothing wrong with the way that you see things. There's nothing wrong with, yes, it makes this harder,
Right.
but so empowering your child with an understanding of who they are and how they're wired. Those are the tools that help them go, oh, I'm not a failure because this is really challenging for me. This is really challenging for me. I'm using the example of like dyslexia or
Right.
ADHD,
Mhm.
really. And again, they're very combined, but oh, I'm having a hard time reading this book right now, not because I'm stupid, but because the text on the page is too small and too close together, that the way my brain is wired, I need to make this bigger. Maybe I need to use a Kindle and open up my text size a little bit bigger. Basically starting to give them the tools, the understanding. Oh, I'm feeling upset right now because I just was outside. I just was working out. My sister just got mad at me. So helping them understand how they're wired safely,
right,
gives you this ability to influence them, and also acknowledging your own areas that, oh, I'm having a hard time right now because I just, I was doing something that's really hard for me. Like I have ADHD, right? So it can be really hard for me sometimes if I'm overwhelmed with my to-do list to plan ahead and plan accordingly or lay out my plans, right? So I might say, if I'm having a rough day, to my child, you know what? Mom said yes to too many things. And now, because of the limitations of the way that my brain works, I'm overwhelmed. My capacity is met, and I am having a hard time planning ahead because I have less fuel in my cup. I know I'm kind of rambling, but
no, that's really good, because I think too often I put down, as you were talking, observant. We have to be observant, because so too often we're reactionary.
Amen.
Instead of looking and saying and speaking to the truth. So that was another thing that I heard you talking about, is, speaking it out loud, instead of just thinking, oh yeah, my child's struggling with this. Let them know.
Yes.
This is why. Because if you do not speak that, what comes out is, I'm stupid, because that is like the lowest thing. And I've heard my siblings say this. My dad's has said before, my one brother, he would say everything, and I'm stupid. And he's like, no, it just means that you have to work harder on it. And it's not that you're stupid. It's just that maybe it's difficult, and it's other things come easy for you. So when all of a sudden you hit this hard thing, it just means that this thing doesn't line up with your wiring as well as some other things. And I think the more that we speak that out, we confront the lies before they're embedded in our kids' heads, because those we can't get out as easily as if we confront them right as they're going in.
Absolutely.
And so, yes, I love that when you talk about that, because it's a reframing, and it's, unfortunately, we have to reframe our thinking. And can you talk a little bit about that process for you? And because you said that, you had to completely change things. What were some things that worked for you when you caught yourself, going back to maybe some older ways of, well, it's just bad behavior, and, all these things, and no, I've got to switch. Were there any things that you used as cues for yourself, or?
I mean, the whole, I actually have a book and a course all about these things, and it really talks about a little bit about my journey. And one of the first things I remember in my story was when I would say my boy was maybe like 3 or 4, and it was, we had gone over a year without sleep. My girl, the shame and the guilt I felt for my girls, and because I made this decision, forget even adoption, but I made a decision to adopt, right? And so I made a choice that was now impacting everyone in my family. But I remember one day I was so exhausted, and he was screaming, and I was just done. And I remember just sitting up, like sliding down the refrigerator, and just tears. But it was like the tears couldn't even come anymore. I was just I was so done with the tears. And what happened is that those tears turned to rage and anger. And see, before that, I was the perfect Christian homeschool mom, and I hope everyone sees and hears the sarcasm in my voice, because I was doing it all perfectly according to how, certain people would like us to believe in our
community. Oh yeah.
In our community.
Exactly.
They're there. And you got to be very careful about that. But I remember reaching out to a group of friends, and I texted like a group of my friends, and I said, someone get me the name of a Christian counselor because I am going to set the house on fire. That's literally what I said to my friends. And obviously I exaggerate. I'm a storyteller by nature, but it was my SOS that I need help. Yeah. And that in and of itself, especially within the Christian community, is we say it, we say seek help, but we really, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to the messy, we judge each other. We, especially when we're younger and earlier in our parenting, right? Because once you get some years behind your belt, you're like, God is so wonderful and he humbles you. Praise God, praise the Lord. You know, and now I'm like, I know nothing. You know, before I knew everything, now I know nothing. You know? And that's the best thing, because you just say open-handed, like, I can only do the best that I can. But I got counseling. I went in for counseling, and I worked with a counselor for about 4 years. And I remember going in thinking I was going to talk about my son, because he was the problem, right? Yeah. He was the problem. It's everybody else is the problem. I'm just the victim, right? And I was. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was suffering. But I spent majority of that time, I didn't talk about my son for probably the first month, because I realized how much was in my head about I'm not good enough. I am a failure as a mother. It was so much these lies that were starting to be untangled. It's my responsibility. Everything's my responsibility. The church tells me that if my child is having a temper tantrum, that's my fault, right? And so I had to really unpack so much. So first it was just this unpacking of, and bringing up, like, I had studied scripture so not necessarily a healthy lens. And so I had to really just trust God enough with this theology that sometimes our theology can actually become an idol that is so far from the Lord and so far from the fruit of Jesus, that I now know that, but I had to work through a lot of my own stuff. And then in that season, I was learning. I was reading everything I could on the brain, on behavior. And as I did that, and I just interviewed lots of experts, developmental pediatricians, speech therapists, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, like anybody who could talk to me and tell me what was going on. And what I realized was that understanding, not only did it help my children, but it helped me better understand myself and better offer compassion to myself. And that compassion to myself was just the fruit of that compassion and love for myself. God tells us we are supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. We fail to remember that Jesus actually tells us we're supposed to care for and love ourselves and prioritize ourselves, because we cannot. We're mean to people when we feel bad about us. Right. Yes. And so that was a huge piece, was learning and my own therapy. And now I'm working with a more trauma-informed therapy, as my research and as my understanding of the brain and the nervous system has just grown. And I'm so grateful. Yeah. But I'm still a working in progress, and grateful for the opportunity to work on the one person I have the most influence over, which is myself. Because when I'm my best self, they're the ones that get the fruit of it. Right. My husband, my children, people in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you can only pour out what you have in you. Yes. And it's not so much about the knowledge, it's about the change of our hearts. Yes. And it's what flows out of our heart that changes others, not what flows out of our mouth or our good thinking. Yeah. And so it's got to get down there in order to come back out. And in a lot of that time, as I was hearing you talk too, these different people you interacted with, they were changing not only your perspective, they were giving you new terminology, new reframed. I'm trying to think of the word. Just the ability to speak the language. Yes. Exactly. As the language that you had previously was so ingrained in what your parenting style was, your relation style. We forget that the basis of, everything, and you talked about this head on, at the beginning, was about that relationship. That relationship is what matters most. And
Yes.
I've learned that through the years of my homeschooling. And the one thing now that all my kids have graduated from my homeschool is that is the thing that I love the most about what
Mm,
we established in our homeschool was that relationship.
yes.
And yet for so many years I missed that because so
Yes.
many people told me I just needed to, control my environment, mold my children, back to what you're talking about. And I was missing the point. And so
Yes.
I'm so glad that, we're addressing this and really, hitting that core. Um,
Yes.
and that's why we homeschool. I mean, if you have to put your homeschool mission statement together, it's gonna be more around, just that relationship in your child. So after we get done, realizing that that's what needs to change, and yet we know there are certain struggles our student has. How do we
Sure.
meld that kind of into a working, practical approach now from day in and day out?
You know, on a working practical approach, I would say that. So I said, okay, relationship first. You might have to spend if you're in a if you are in a bleeding out period in relationship wise, and
Right.
I talk like I dive into this really deeply in my course, and I very rarely even talk about my course, but we're talking about this now. I talk very specifically about if you are bleeding out relationship wise, if you've been like this with your child, which I have been there. So
Mhm.
this is all from experience. Then the first thing you have to do is stop and focus on that relationship first, not just in the heat of the moment, but you might
Yeah.
have to spend several weeks where you are going to change the nervous system, the heartbeat of your home and your relationship to
Yes.
get back on track to
Mhm.
because the way that we are designed by God is we have this nervous system, and we know, well, just using that cliche, neurons that fire together wire together. So if this is what's happening all the time,
Yeah.
then your child's nervous system by design is going to be in that kind of fight or flight, or that a stimulated, stressed out state before they even start school. Well, when that
Yeah.
happens, then we lose access to this prefrontal cortex, the higher level thinking part of your brain. This is the
Mhm.
executive functioning center of the brain associated with ADHD and autism and other, and just childhood in general.
Right.
That part of the brain, we lose access when we're super, super stressed out. So the priority might be for several weeks, a month, that we're going to focus on relationship, and everything else has to go to the wayside, because my long-term goal is to
Yes.
get us to a position where my child feels safe learning.
Mhm.
My child, not safe like you're going to hit them, but safe in that relationship, safe in their own skin, safe,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
I mean, we have had to take, and you might be talking about your own issues or fears in school growing up. You might
Mhm.
start modeling that you trust them with some of your story and start to connect. So that might be several weeks, a month. I mean, I've taken almost an entire school year once where we did the bare minimum because I had a child severely struggling with anxiety related to a
Yeah.
lot of what we went through before. And that's okay,
Mhm.
because my ultimate goal is her
Right.
as an adult. So we
Yeah.
can always, the 12 years, and I'm sure you've talked about this before, it doesn't take
Mhm.
12 years to learn any of this stuff.
It
Doesn't take
doesn't.
doesn't take
Right.
12 years to learn anything.
Exactly.
You can grab a couple of Learn Math Fast books at the end of high school and get through all your math. I'm not saying that's what you do,
Right.
but what I'm saying, at the end of the day, they will have all the time in the world to learn. So
Mhm.
once that safety net's there, then lessons become so much easier. You start with
They
one,
do.
they become so much easier.
Mhm.
You're not
Yeah.
fighting so much because they believe in themselves. They believe mom's got my back. Mom's not going to freak out at me if I lose it. And you know what? Expect that your child's going to lose it.
Yeah.
Expect that there's going to be bumps.
Mm.
That expectation alone, when it happens and your kid loses their mind or you lose your mind, it's, oh my word. Hey, we figured out what doesn't work. Let's go back. We're not feeling safe. Something's not working right now. Let's go back. Let's see. Let's pare down. Um,
Yeah.
it's a lens. It really is a lens, and
Mhm.
we can talk very specific. But I that's really the first step. Um, Taking breaks, understanding your
Mm.
child's sensory needs. There is sensory, when a lot of people, I remember people will talk about sensory kids with sensory processing disorder or sensory processing issues. Hey, we all have sensory
At
needs.
some point, yes.
We all do.
Some
We all do.
extreme or another.
I don't like to wear tight pants around my waist. That's a sensory need. That distracts me
Right.
from being able to focus when I'm uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of our children who maybe have sound issues with sounds, I realize when I'm at the end, when my cognitive cup is low, sounds are going to be one of the first things to set me off at the end of the night, right? Understanding your own sensory needs. Like here's another one for me. I talk about this too. I give my own examples because then moms can start identifying with
Exactly.
and connecting with their child, realizing, oh, it's
Mhm.
not just them that has sensory issues. They're not being disrespectful because they're frustrated that they're like, I had a child who her big sister would make all these noises because we all have ADHD for some sort. And my oldest would make all these because that's how she's wired. She's a verbal processor like her mama, right? And so she was always making noises and she needs music going when she's learning,
Mhm.
And then the middle one, when she was younger, before I knew any better, would be like, ah! And I thought she was being difficult. No. Her noise was very distracting to her brain. Her sensory system of noise was very distracting. So being able to identify your own sensory needs, understand your child's sensory needs, which I love to talk about sensory stuff, but we can say, hey, you know what? You're frustrated right now. Let's go make couch sandwiches. You're feeling, I can tell you're wiggling too much right now. You're not wiggling too much, but your body's telling you. So like I'll say to my son, your body's telling you, you need some serotonin. I'll just say that with him, you need some proprioception. You need some deep squeezes. So because you're wiggling a lot, your body's saying this. So let's go get some deep squeezes, and I'll take a cushion and put him on the cushion on the couch and then put another cushion on him and then sit on him and give him that deep pressure. But he understands this as part of his wiring. So that later when he gets older, he could be like, Mom, I need to go jump on the trampoline, or Mom, I need to go punch a punching bag. Not because he's being difficult, but because he knows, oh, I know this feeling. Right. And now I can come back and learn. Once I get that input to my body, I can come back and learn better. And I'm not and now I'm not in trouble. Right. I'm not a bad kid because I'm moving. I'm just wiggly because my brain is looking for this input.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many things that we can teach our kids through those everyday in and out experiences. And yet we're oftentimes too focused on the list, the to-do things, that we don't even make time for those. And in the end, we're dealing with a child who's completely shut down, and we're trying to teach them things that they cannot process because they're not in a place to process.
Exactly.
And then we think, I'm just a bad parent. My child's can't learn, and therefore homeschooling's not working.
Right.
Well, not so much.
Exactly.
It's just that our approach is not right.
Exactly.
So thank you for really expanding on that, because I think I can say that, but yet without your example, that doesn't make as much sense. But yes, it really comes down to those little things and being able to point those out again and to step back, to allow that breathing room and not pack our days so full that we can't say, we need a little break here, or this is something about you that you need to learn about. And, as your kids become adults, that these are the things that if they don't know that about themselves can lead to even bigger problems.
Yes, Peggy. Yes, 100%. And that's that vision. That's that purpose. Right. It's like, okay, what's my purpose? Long term. Because if they don't know how to regulate themselves, they're going to scream at somebody, or if it's like, I think about it a lot, like equipping the academics is secondary to equipping them with an understanding of who they are and how they're wired, because that balloon that gets blown up all day long, that could burst if we don't release some of the air, right? So for like all the tensions, that are built up on us in a particular day, like I was telling you, and I talk a lot to moms. Again, I really want them to understand themselves. I want us to understand ourselves, because when we understand ourselves, we're better equipped to offer compassion and connect with, and then serve our children. So like for me, it's like, okay, today was a day where I woke up. I told you earlier before we got on, I hurt my back really badly, and this is unusual for me. And I had to get my son to some homeschool classes that he takes. And my cup was already down to 50%, but right when I woke, probably less, honestly. And I knew I had this today and I had other things to do. And so my cup is lower, and I have to be aware of that when, I started to feel a little shaky earlier, and I realized, listen to my body. What's my body telling me? Oh, I haven't eaten. And then I need to take some things off my plate today, or I need to go for a walk. So I had my 15-year-old, I was feeling like just overwhelmed. I had finished an article I was writing. I was starting to feel overwhelmed. My back was hurting. And I realized, okay, I didn't plan for a walk, but I'm going to go for a walk in the sun, because that's releasing some of the tension in that balloon, so that I can be better later.
Yes.
And so that means something else will probably have to go off the plate. That wasn't 100%. But in the long term, I'm going to get more accomplished in a healthier way. And that's what I try to tell my girls. My 15-year-old that started school today, because we waited till her little brother started his little classes, because he's outside the door. And she was really anxious, about starting school. She was starting school. And so she got some stuff done at like 11:30. She said, Mom, I don't know, I'm just kind of down. And I said, well, just remember something. I said, you just worked really hard because you started something new and out of routine today, right? And we don't realize our brains, and you probably know this, but our brains are like 5% of the mass, but they take up more than 20% of our fuel, of our calories, of our ATP.
Right.
So by just reframing it that, no, you're not lazy. No, there's nothing wrong with you, that you just did some really hard things. The grace was given to herself. I said, go in your room, go on your swing. She's got like a hammock swing in her room. Go chill, like give yourself grace. Later on, when I ask her to do something, she's going to be able to do it.
Right.
Because, so always think of your own cup, your own fuel.
Yeah.
And that helps.
Because you can get so driven. I found that I would have to remind myself to eat. I have to set timers on my phone to do that too.
Yes.
But also that, to drink a cup of water every hour, to be, to get up and go to the bathroom when I need to, not waiting and doing 5 other things while, and it's setting those priorities for, how do I, take care of myself, and really, how do I show my kids that that's important? And that, because otherwise we can set that example of, you're not important. The to-do list is more important than you are, just by our actions, not even saying it. And that is definitely, if you think about it, not what you want to be teaching your kids, but in the essence, it's what we do, because we live that way, and we live in a society that has trained us to be that way. And we have to untrain in our houses. And I know we've been talking, a lot about that. And I'm so happy that we're talking on this subject, because health-wise, it's not setting you up as a parent for a good long term. And parents who have kids who have special needs have the most health issues of any. And so when I saw Lindsay's website and all the health things she was writing about, it made me super excited, because I knew she knew that our families need to hear this. Because otherwise you're going to end up, well, like I did, diagnosed with cancer 3 years ago, because I was ignoring myself. And so many of just different issues that that people deal with. The percentage is higher, and unfortunately the death rate is higher too, because we get ourselves down that road too far.
Absolutely. I mean, and to your point, I mean, this is a huge area of this is a huge area for us as women. And I'm starting to talk more about this with my audience, about how to help themselves, but it not only the health piece, but like our children. the chronic stress
Yes.
that we put autistic kids with ADHD, anxiety, all these things. This is a lot of our autistic kids, and ADHD struggle with digestive issues, struggle to go to the bathroom. Have eczema, can't coordinate their bodies. Well, part of that is related to our stress response. And so again, like, it's not just what do I want them to believe about themselves. It's also, it's all, our bodies are connected. It's not just, it's not the brain. It's not separate from the gut, the body, all this kind of, we know this, but going outside to let my child jump on a trampoline is not fun. That trains their brain for health. It primes their brain for learning. It primes their body for health, for digestion.
Right.
All of these things are integrated. And so we think, oh, I have to check off the to-do list, all the school plans, because the school says I have to do this, or when I was in school, it looked like this, or the lady up the street, my pastor's wife's kids are geniuses. Okay, at the end of the day, I don't care what your pastor's wife is doing with their children. Compliant children, okay? They have their own health issues.
Right.
Okay. We know, it's trauma, the body responds to trauma with increased autoimmune issues. I just read this fantastic book by Gabor Mate. I don't know if you've read, you will love it. He talks a lot about cancer and trauma and stress, and it just reminded me of you. But I want parents to understand that the decisions, how the stress level in the home can be toxic for your long-term goals, for not just your own health, but your children's health.
Yes, absolutely.
We're one, like, our bodies are integrated, and we have to honor that.
Yeah.
And it seems like a lot, and that's why I always circle back to, okay, let's pull back on the stress and the fighting, and let's get our nervous systems and our bodies back to a place where they feel safe and loved. Because at the end of the day, right, it's love.
Right. Yeah.
And then you go from there, and then you build from there.
Right. Yeah. And I think that circles back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, was that safe relational environment where learning can really take place, because you're allowed to be who you are and who you were created to be, versus who society or, a curriculum or anything says you need to be molded into. And I think if there's any takeaway from all of this, I really want my listeners to understand that is what a purpose-driven instruction in homeschool looks like. It's, you start at the child, and you start with your relationship with that child. And I know you had said at the very beginning, Lindsay, that your son, when you adopted him, that communication was a big struggle. And I think a lot of parents think that when their child has communication issues, that they can just continue to homeschool and then work on the communication. Can you talk just a little bit to that? Because I think we kind of lose the point that instruction happens through communication. And how do we let go of, again, I need to be teaching, yet my child I need to know how to, like, relate too first.
Well, there's so much to that communication. Language and speech and language processing are a huge passion of mine, because even if your child is speaking, parents often think, well, my child should understand if they're able to speak. And there's a huge difference between being able to articulate sounds into words and to even use them appropriately based on your own motivation. So if a child says, oh, mommy, I want to ride my bike. Yes, they do want to ride their bike. They are saying probably what they want. But there's a big difference between that and processing language auditory input that's coming to the brain, and then making a cohesive sense out of it. So I have a workshop. It's called what reading, writing, and relationships, and what language processing does how much it impacts our academics, to your point,
Yeah.
but it
Right.
also impacts our relationships, because oftentimes we think children are being disobedient when we send them upstairs to go brush their teeth and put their pajamas on, and 35 minutes later we go up there and they're playing video games.
Right.
Half the time the brain didn't process and actually make a cohesive message and then you add in the working memory piece, which is an executive function related to ADHD and autism and childhood. But the language piece is a huge piece, because it doesn't just impact academics, it greatly impacts social skills, relationship,
Yes.
all these things. So I talk a lot, and I don't know if this is where you were going with this, but I will say, like, I always recommend, especially if you have a speaking child. So in the autistic community, we have lots of kids that are non-speaking. But that doesn't mean they don't have a voice, and it doesn't mean they're not verbal.
Right.
So I will say, I'm just going to throw this out there. This is not the main topic here, but if you have a child that is autistic or is non-speaking, advocate for AAC as soon as possible, because you want to give them the ability to communicate their thoughts, because they do have thoughts and they do have words and they do have ideas that they need to communicate, and they're very, very valuable, and they can change the world. So don't let a school system or a speech language pathologist tell you not to advocate for getting them some sort of device that they can start communicating with you, because they matter and their thoughts matter. And the more children don't have access to communicate their thoughts, the more frustrated they become. We know as parents, we try to say all of our kids' names, and we say all 15 of our kids' names if we're homeschooling, just kidding. But we say Jimmy, Stan, blah, 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 blah. And I'm so frustrated because I can't get a word out. Well, just imagine if you're a child who has a very hard time getting their language out.
Right. Yes.
But I talk about the importance at home of conversation, of dialogue, of asking questions and listening to your child, and responding to what they say, as opposed to driving home your point. Prioritizing. So if I'm reading a book to your child, or, I mean, we could be talking about anything, driving in the car, language and dialogue and connection verbally with your child is key to becoming an effective writer, because a writer is a communicator.
Yep.
So if we, unfortunately, so many of us were raised in a school system that says once they hit age 5, they go into the school system and it's be quiet and listen. The kids don't have the auditory, that's not even age appropriate. Kids are supposed to be talking. This is their way to practice using the language.
Yeah, exactly.
Without the ability to practice using language, they will not be able to understand what they're reading. So conversations are critical. Sometimes you need to put the book away for a year or two and just start talking and engaging in conversation. That's more valuable to me. I'm sorry to cut you off, but
I love that. Yes.
So many parents are trying to get their kids to write because the second grade curriculum says they're supposed to be able to do creative writing for 30 minutes. Give me a break.
Right.
Absolutely not.
No. I have never followed that rule. Actually, my daughter just started college this year, and she's like, Mom, I only wrote one thing for you. And so she has an English class, and I was like, you know how to write, you know how to speak. I said, and you have really good vocabulary. You've listened to audiobooks. You know, we've had in-depth conversations. We always used our dinner table for debates. And she's realizing she's a very good writer because she knows how to communicate. And that's really what it boils down to. And I think it's really good to end on that top, this topic, because all of these curriculum steps, they're developed by people who want to set your child up with the right proper steps that they have seen methodically work. But for a lot of kids who struggle, it really comes back to confidence in themselves, that back and forth relationship. And like Lindsay, like you said a while ago, was they can learn a lot in a very short period of time, and they have the rest of their life to learn it too. They will fill in the gaps. Even if you homeschool to the T, the perfect curriculum, I won't even know what that is, but your child will still graduate and leave your house not knowing everything. I promise you.
Yes. Right. So I need to quote you on that. That is right. So give up. So stop going for that, because they're never going to know it all.
Exactly.
Right? Gosh, good.
Yeah. Francesca's been watching, and she said, hello, great topic. Thanks so much.
Oh, well, thank you.
Absolutely. So we had one question come in from a viewer, and it was kind of a little off topic, but I don't know if you want to address it or if we can just talk about it a little bit. But Sherry says that she's homeschools and she's a single parent and works and just kind of wants some strategies. And I know you run a business from home. I
Yes.
do too.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
through my homeschooling years, I did that a bit on and off. And so, how do you balance that?
Girl. Sherry, you're right. It is not easy. It's not easy. But what is so wonderful, I have found, first of all, so many single parents homeschool, so many working moms
Yes.
homeschool. Doesn't mean it's easy, but you can do it. And I would say, first of all, find community.
Yes,
Find
absolutely.
community. And I, I, this is just my first thought. I was like, okay, you go into Facebook and you create a group in your local community, or you find a single mom homeschool Facebook group, because I promise you it's out there, because you need to know you're not alone. You need to
Yeah,
know you're not alone,
absolutely.
and you need each other to bounce things off of. You need that support. Okay.
Yep.
So that's the first thing. And secondly, know you can do it. The great thing about today's world with homeschooling is it's so much more mainstream, and there's so many phenomenal tools. Yes. So I tend to tell parents, like, don't think of homeschooling as people think of homeschooling, they think I need to bring my child home and I need to sit at a table with them for 6 hours a day. And I have to teach them everything. Absolutely not. You can homeschooling is taking charge of your child's education. You're the CEO of their education, and you decide how they're going to do it, what they're going to do. So you can outsource so many classes there. I mean, the number of options out there of online stuff, and you don't have to do everything online. Some parents don't want their kids online all the time. Totally get it. But there are some valuable, fantastic programs out there for homeschooling that you can have your child taking classes. I really love OutSchool. I love OutSchool for neurodivergent kids, because you tend to have excellent, very
there's a lot of variety, and also very focused into their own interests. Classes. And I have seen that too.
I am so impressed with programs that will use your child's interest. So if your child's into Minecraft, they can be in a Minecraft group. Now, it could be called a social group, but you need to think of it as a communication group.
Yes.
The dialogue is so foundational for communication, it lays a foundation for later reading and bigger ideas. So I would say to that mom, there are 365 days a year. School does not just happen between the hours of 8 and 2.
Right.
No, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I'm sure you as well, we're always learning.
Absolutely.
At the dinner table. Oh, let's go do our math. It's Saturday. We didn't get as much math done. Let's go. Let's go to Panera for an hour and bust out some math work. There's ways to be very, very creative. And so I just really want to encourage her to find her people and know she can totally do it, and better than what you probably being offered by your local school system.
Yeah. Thank you. That was great encouragement. Yes. I think, you just have to know you're not alone, first of all. And I love that you pointed that out, because we feel like I'm the only one doing this. And the people that have been there, done that, they've got some great tips and tricks for you, I am sure, because they have asked the same questions.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And found lots of creative answers. So talk about your website a little bit, and just what our viewers can find on there.
So yes, my website is aheartforallstudents.com. I have tons of resources related to homeschooling and parenting neurodivergent kids, adult ADHD. I am very neurodiversity affirming, in the sense that I really look to in autistic adults for understanding about autism, that people with lived experience are the ones to learn from. And so lots of lifting up autistic voices to give parents just an encouragement, and to understand that your child is a gift and they have purpose, and God's given them, every one of our children, passions and gifts and purpose. And
absolutely,
parents need to understand that there is such there's just so many successful, amazing ways to support neurodivergent kids that we need to stop with this. We need to think of them more with the strengths that they have, because that's how God's designed them on purpose. So tons of resources, cheat sheets. Obviously, I have some homeschool, lots of recommendations on curriculum, how I choose curriculum, how I recommend ideas on how to, tweak things in your homeschool. Lots of stuff on sensory processing. I mean, awesome. Health, all the things.
Yeah.
And I'd love to meet them over there. And I always respond to emails, and
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yes. So that again is aheartforallstudents.com. And reach out to Lindsay and let her know just if something has struck a chord with you that she talked about, or the courses you were talking about. Are those available on your website, I'm assuming?
Yes. I have a course. I have a parenting course that's basically everything I wish I had known when I was going through the with my boy. And that's called Barely Surviving to Outright Thriving. And that's really, that's where the nuts and bolts of it are. And then I have some mini courses and workshops on homeschooling, ADHD, sensory, like the sensory processing in your homeschool when your child tends to be more dysregulated and emotional. And so, I've got lots on there for you.
Very cool. Yes. So definitely check it out. And I will put the link for your website on the web YouTube description, as well as in the podcast description when the podcast comes out. So then you guys can just all click on there instead of having to try to remember what all words were included in that URL and how to do that. So that's always easier. But well, thank you so much, Lindsay. This was an amazing conversation, and point on for starting off the school year out the right way. I appreciate just your transparency and your willingness to just be an encourager with your story.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So thank you all who joined us. I saw a lot of people popping on and off. I know it's your lunch hour, so usually people aren't too chatty, but we thank you for joining in. If you want to watch the whole thing, that'll be available really soon to rewatch the whole video. And then in a couple weeks, the podcast will be out for you to listen to, which I know a lot of you do. You just download it. So we will have another broadcast actually this week. We're going to be talking about 3 things that boost at-home learning with Sarah Collins. She's a repeat guest she's with the Homeschool OT. And so she's going to talk about 3 things that she's found overall in working with parents over the years that really boost learning for struggling learners. So that's what we're going to talk about on Thursday afternoon this week. And so I hope to see you then. Thanks again, Lindsay. And thank you all for joining us. And I'll see you again next year. Until then, God bless everybody and take care. Bye.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool. Go to spedhomeschool.com to get resources and support for teaching your unique learner at home.